I'm Clara. I turned 66 this year, and let me tell you, life didn't truly start until 62. Before that, I was living in a beautiful, gilded cage built by my own hands and adorned by my children. My son, Daniel, was my only child, my pride and joy. When he married Sarah, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Sarah was beautiful, effusive, and so complimentary. They were a stunning couple, and they called me their rock. It started small, as these things always do. Daniel and Sarah were both in competitive fields, he in tech, she in interior design, and they were always just on the cusp of a big break. They were building their dream, and I, the widowed mother with a healthy retirement fund from my late husband's insurance, was eager to help them climb. "Mom, you are the anchor of this family," Daniel would say, leaning over my worn kitchen table, his eyes bright with ambition. "We just need a little runway. Once the new company is funded, we'll pay you back double, maybe triple." The first loan was $20,000 for office space. "Just until the lease is signed," Sarah promised, squeezing my hand with a warmth I believed was genuine. She'd bring me orchids, beautiful, fragile things, and spend an hour talking about how I was her style icon. They treated me like a visiting dignitary. I was indispensable. I was loved. Over the next 4 years, the requests grew. Babysitting their 2 children, Lily and Ethan, who I genuinely adored, don't misunderstand, but I was suddenly their unpaid, full-time nanny, turned into moving into their spare apartment to be closer to the children. Then came the big one. They needed $50,000 to bridge the gap until Daniel's next venture capitalized. This time, they didn't ask for a loan. They suggested I invest, becoming a founding family partner. It sounded so official, so inclusive. I felt a slight unease then, a flutter in my chest that told me I was stretching too far. But Sarah countered my worry perfectly. "Clara, sweetheart, you deserve to be part of something big. We'd never risk your future. This is a sure thing. Besides, who else would we trust with our legacy? You're the only person who truly gets us." That was the magic phrase. "You're the only person who truly gets us." It meant they saw the real me, the wise matriarch, not just a bank account. I handed over the money, and that flutter of unease settled into a deep, uncomfortable quiet. The quiet lasted until the Christmas after the investment. I had been living in their smaller apartment for 2 years. It was lovely, but I often felt like a tenant who was also required to cook dinner. That December, Daniel and Sarah decided to take the kids on a lavish ski trip to Colorado. I, naturally, was left behind to hold down the fort and mind their 2 expensive dogs, a fussy tabby cat, and handle the holiday grocery shopping for their return. I was making myself a cup of tea on Christmas morning, alone, when I realized I'd left my favorite novel in the main house. I let myself in with the emergency key. The house was cold and dark, smelling faintly of pine and expensive cologne. I found the book in Daniel's home office. And that's when I saw it, a printed bank statement lying open on his desk. It wasn't Daniel's business account. It was my retirement account statement, which I'd left with him for a simple transfer 6 months prior. Underneath the account details was a scribbled note, not in Daniel's hand, but Sarah's, in that looping script I knew so well. It was a budget summary. Total inheritance fund, $210,000. Used for ski trip, advance $15,000. Outstanding balance, mom's loans/investment $70,000. Target buffer until funding $5,000. Notes: don't discuss the interest payment. Tell her the market is down. Keep up the best mom ever routine. We need her to renew the insurance beneficiary form next month. I froze. The cold of the house didn't touch the slow burn rising in my chest. The market is down. I hadn't invested in the market. I had invested in them. The orchids, the compliments, the rock talk, it was all a budget line item. It was the cost of the investment. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just felt a profound, chilling clarity. They hadn't seen me as a mother or a partner. I was a resource. And they had quantified the emotional labor required to maintain access to that resource. I quietly closed the office door, took my book, and walked back to the small apartment. I spent the next 3 days not thinking, but planning. When they returned, tanned and cheerful, the air crackled with their usual forced enthusiasm. Sarah handed me a small, expensive keychain from Aspen. "Mom, you were just a lifesaver. We missed you so much." "That's lovely, Sarah," I said, looking her straight in the eye. I had never done that before. I had always looked down, embarrassed by my own request. "Now, Daniel, let's talk about the business. It's time for the first quarter return from my partnership investment. I'll also need the $20,000 lease loan repaid, as the business is up and running now." The smiles vanished. The beautiful light in Daniel's eyes flickered out. "Mom, what is this?" Daniel asked, sounding hurt. "You know things are tight. We told you it was a long-term investment." "This is shocking, Mom. It feels like you don't trust us." "I don't," I replied simply. "Not with my future. And not anymore with my heart." I held up my hand before Sarah could launch into her defense. "I know about the notes, Sarah. I know about the routine. I know you viewed me as a balance sheet. And the truth is, I let you. I loved the feeling of being your indispensable savior, and I paid a heavy price for that ego boost. Now, the game is over." The ensuing conversation was ugly. It was filled with denial, victimhood, and outright anger. They told me I was being hysterical, old, and paranoid. They threatened to cut me off from my grandchildren. That last threat hit me hard, but the clarity I'd found held fast. "You won't cut them off," I said calmly, "because you still need my goodwill. But here are the facts. You have 3 months to vacate my apartment. I am dissolving my partnership and will send an invoice for the $70,000. I'm giving you a year to repay it. If you fail, I'll pursue legal action. As of today, I am not your nanny, your cook, or your investor. I am simply a grandmother who will see her grandchildren on my terms, not yours." I left the keychain on the counter, walked out the back door, got into my car, and drove straight to a mid-range hotel. It was terrifying. It was the first truly selfish thing I had done in years. And it was glorious. The separation was messy and painful. Daniel tried to involve other family members, painting me as the suddenly cruel matriarch. But I stuck to my facts, and more importantly, I stuck to my boundaries. The financial recovery took 2 years. I had to threaten legal action, and eventually, with the threat of exposure, they were forced to sell a few assets to repay the bulk of the money. I took a loss on the investment, but I secured the majority of my inheritance back. But the real win wasn't the money. The money bought me the peace to start my life again. I was 64, healthy, and debt-free, and I had a fierce new sense of self-respect. I sold the big, empty family house, the one that held all the ghosts of my past service, and bought a bright, smaller apartment downtown. I went back to school. I had always loved history, so I enrolled in an online course for archival studies. I wasn't doing it for a degree. I was doing it for the sheer joy of learning. I joined a hiking club and discovered the incredible, healing power of the mountains. I started volunteering at the local museum, cataloging historical artifacts. My hands, once busy folding Daniel and Sarah's laundry, were now respectfully touching objects from a century ago. I found friends. True friends. People who asked me how I was and genuinely waited for the answer. People who valued my company, not my balance. When Daniel and Sarah finally invited me to dinner a few years later, hoping to fully mend things, I accepted. They picked a fancy, expensive place, a familiar attempt to impress the investor. I arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a dress I'd bought in Florence on a solo trip, and I looked better than I had in 20 years. The conversation was stilted. They talked about their new house, their latest business woes, and then, inevitably, came the hesitant request for help with their children's expensive private school tuition. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, that sounds difficult, dear," I said, sipping my wine. "I wish I could help, but I'm afraid my funds are currently tied up in something very important, a 6-week photography expedition through Patagonia. I leave next month." The look on Sarah's face, that sudden, dawning realization that the resource had not only been depleted, but had run off to South America, was priceless. I saw my grandchildren regularly after that, but always on neutral territory, at the park or the museum. I was Grandma Clara, who smelled faintly of ozone and old paper, and who had fascinating stories about ancient civilizations, not Mom, the live-in helper. My win wasn't revenge. My win was recognizing that the sweetness they offered was poison. My win was taking my life, my time, my assets, and my dignity back into my own hands and deciding, at 62, to finally be the protagonist of my own story. And I've been winning ever since.